Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this Goods Vehicle Movement Service presentation. My name's Lorna Taylor, work for HM Revenue and Customs within the Haulier Account Management team. You'll also be joined by my colleague Paul Earnshaw on this presentation, who works within our Haulier Readiness team. And we're going to walk through some step-by-step processes of how you register for the Goods Vehicle Movement Service and a few other things. So if we can just switch to the next slide, please. What we would like to do before we go through the presentation is to ask you if you would take part in a couple of questions via the Slido function. We've got the address here at www.sli.do, hashtag BPDG, and there's a QR code that you can use there for accessing that service. So the first question that we would like to ask is, have you moved goods between the EU and GB and vice versa since the 1st of January 2021? So there are 4 possible answers. We would appreciate if you could take a few minutes just to answer that question. And then on the next slide is just what we're going to run through. Sorry, question 2. You're testing me here, Paul. Question 2. Which of the following statements best applies to you and or your business? And again, there are 3 questions, 3 possible answers there. You have a QR code and it's that same address and hashtag BPDG. Thank you. So the things that we're going to go through on today's presentation, we're going to walk you through registering for GVMS, and that will also include how to get through the multi-factor authentication process. Some of you might know it as 2-step verification. It's the secure way of making sure that you can access your records. We'll also talk through creating a goods movement reference, or GMR, and the things that you put in there. We'll go through how you check if you need to report for an inspection and how you can avoid and correct some of the current common errors that we're coming up against as people have been using the Goods Vehicle Movement Service. And then we've got just a little bit of information about the help and support that we've got available within HMRC and HM Government to help you with any queries or issues that you might have. So first of all, I'll pass to my colleague Paul, and he's going to just introduce a little bit of background information about GVMS. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna, and good afternoon, everybody. So, as Lorna said, my name's Paul Earnshaw. I also work for HMRC like Lorna. HMRC is Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, if you don't know, government department in the UK, and I work in the Great Britain Directorate supporting haulier industry readiness for the projects and programmes being delivered by HMRC. So we're here to talk about GVMS today, or the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, which is its full name. So just a little bit of a history for you. So on the 31st of December 2020, the UK government introduced a new IT platform called the Goods Vehicle Movement Service, or GVMS for short. And this is to support the pre-lodgement model for both imports and exports and to facilitate common transit convention movements. Now, the pre-lodgement model, which has been developed as an alternative for where border locations might not have the space and infrastructure to operate temporary storage regimes, ensures that all declarations are pre-lodged before anybody boards, and this will maintain flow, especially at high volume rural locations. So what does GVMS enable us to do? So it enables, firstly, declaration references to be linked together into one envelope, if you like, so that the person moving the goods For example, the driver only has to present one single reference, which is called the Goods Movement Reference, or GMR, at the frontier. So when we refer to the envelope, we refer to the GMR, which includes all of those individual references. So you supply one reference at the border. What else does it do? It also provides a linking of the movement of the goods to those declarations, and it enables the automatic arrival and departure of goods within HMRC systems in the UK. So that's a very important function. Another key function of GVMS is it provides automation of the Office of Transit function for Common Transit Convention movements. So does this electronically and marks the entry of the goods into Northern Ireland or Great Britain. Lastly, it notifies the risk and outcome of declarations and whether goods are held or not. It does that through HMRC systems, and this is sent into the person in control of the goods by the time the goods physically arrive in Great Britain. So GVMS, it's been live for goods moving under the Common Transit Convention procedure from EU into GB since the 1st of January 2021. As stage customs controls end on the 1st of January 2022, it will start to be used, or it will be used, for both imports and exports. Not only imports and exports, it will also allow goods to be moved under other procedures, such as the Transport International Routier or International Road Transport procedures, or ATA carnet movements, and some movements for authorised traders as well. Okay, so a key part of our demonstration today is about registering for GVMS. And I'm going to talk you through how you register for it. But firstly, I just want to say that who should be registering for GVMS, and just spend a minute or so running through that. So firstly, hauliers should register for GVMS. And if you're a haulier moving goods through EU ports into GB, then it's really important that you register as soon as possible and don't leave that as close to the 1st of January as you can. You will need to be registered for GVMS to move goods from the 1st of January if you're moving through a GVMS port, and you will need to provide a GMR from that date. So it's really important that you get registered now. I know we're less than a month away now, but if you are going to be moving goods, please register as soon as you can. Now, in terms of how we define a haulier, so we define a haulier as any entity that moves goods, but we do expand on that a little bit more. So this could be an independent driver that transports goods and does their own customs paperwork. So a sole trader could register if that's what they do. It could be a company that subcontracts to pick up goods on behalf of another business. It could be a logistics business hired to transport goods and complete customs processes on behalf of another one. Or it could be a large retail business that transports and declares your own goods. Now, these terms are exhaustive. It may be that the business you operate doesn't fit neatly into those categories, but if it is something similar and you are moving goods, then you should be registering for GVMS. One final point is that it doesn't always have to be a haulier that registers for GVMS. That can be delegated, that responsibility can be delegated to, for an example, an agent or another third party or broker. It's just that if it is delegated to that third party, then they would need to adopt all the responsibilities that a haulier would need to carry out, such as pass messages on to drivers and communicate within that supply chain. Okay, I think I've talked enough about definitions of hauliers. So let's have a look at how we can register for GVMS. So how you do it is really, really straightforward, as you'd imagine. If you've used a search engine before, and I know we all have, find yourself an appropriate search engine such as Google. Any term such as GVMS registration will help you find the page in gov.uk called Register for the GVMS. So they say we've got an example there on the screen. Register for the Goods Vehicle Movement Service in gov.uk. So that is the page you would click on to do that. So when you actually click onto that registration page, you'll be directed here. And this is really made up of what that page looks like, a couple of shots of the various bits of text that are on there. So it's really important that you read and understand the information on this page around who, when and what you need to do to register. One key point is that you need to obtain a UK Government Gateway account and an EORI number beginning with GB. You can do that all as part of this registration. So when you've read all the various parts on here, and there is links to various bits of information that you can click out to as well if you're not sure about any of the content. But as soon as you are done, you hit the Register Now button, which is here in green, and you can continue. So the next page you're taken to is the Government Gateway sign-in page. Now, if you have a Government Gateway account, you should enter your user ID and password, and you should click to sign in at this point. As you can see here, the first three red lines here, enter your Government Gateway user ID, enter your password and sign in. Now, if you don't have one, which is the fourth red choice there, the fourth red arrow, then if you click on this particular screen, create sign-in details, you'll be redirected to provide some information. So you'll be asked to provide your email address, your name, whether you're an organisation, agent or individual, and you will also create a password and some recovery words. And then you will be provided with a user ID. Now, this takes no more than a couple of minutes. Note again at the bottom of this page, there are some further options there to click if you've forgotten passwords or your Government Gateway ID, or if you've forgotten them all, indeed, which does happen to us sometimes. You can use the appropriate option to recover what you need to recover. Okay, so once a Government Gateway has been entered, the next screen will confirm if an EORI is connected to the account. Regardless of this, though, you will be taken to the actual registration page for GVMS afterwards. There are two registration journeys for GVMS that you click into at this stage. One, if you have a GB EORI, and one if you don't have a GB EORI. Like I said earlier, you can request that GB EORI and register for GVMS at the same time. And both of these processes do take around 5 minutes to complete. Now, for the purposes of time today, we won't take you through all these registration screens. How you actually answer the questions depends upon the questions you answer. So the journey will be niche for you, but just rest assured it takes around no longer than 5 minutes to complete. And we do have examples of some of these registration journeys on our YouTube account. Now we can share these with you afterwards if you haven't seen this before, and if you've been to any of our recent webinars in HMRC, you'll have probably seen these anyway. In terms of the YouTube versions of these registration journeys, just a little bit of a caveat, they are in the English language like today, but you can switch on the subtitles to another language as you seem fit to obtain a text translation. So when you have been through that individual registration process, you will receive this screen. It will confirm that your application has been confirmed, and it will tell you that you're now enrolled to get a goods movement reference. And you're ready to go in terms of getting that goods movement reference. And we will run through that journey in a little while. Firstly, though, just something I want to mention around multi-factor authentication. So the first time you sign into your Government Gateway account after registering for GVMS, you'll need to set up some additional security, and this is called multi-factor authentication. So that's the screen you will see in the top right hand corner, and you will click continue. Now you will get three options on how you want to get access codes. One would be a text message, which goes to a mobile phone. One would be a voice call to get a code by automatic message if you are using a UK mobile or landline, but you wouldn't select that option if you're not using a UK mobile or landline. Or lastly, you can use an authentication app that you already have for a smartphone or tablet. So at this point, you check you check which option you want to choose, whether that's text to voice call or authentication app, and you continue with your journey. So if you chose text message as the option, you're asked if the mobile number is a UK mobile. Now, if you're not using a UK mobile, you would enter the English language name of the country of the mobile phone. So you would use, for example, Italy there, and you would click continue. You would then need to enter the mobile phone number as you would expect. The country code will be populated automatically, and you can click send the access code. So at this stage, you'll be sent an access code to the mobile phone number you provided. You would enter that access code and you would click continue. And this will confirm that you've set up your additional security. So every time you sign into your Government Gateway account, you'll be asked to enter a new access code, will be sent to you. And depending on which option you chose, we showed you one option there where you've actually chosen to receive by text message, but you'll receive similar screens to actually go through the authentication each time. A final note is that although you will be sent an access, we will send you an access code each time you do sign into your Government Gateway. There will be an option to stay signed in, should I say, for 7 days. So if you're going frequently into that Government Gateway account within the 7 days, you can have that option not to receive a code each time. Okay, I think I've talked enough about registration and multi-factor authentication. As you can see, it's all pretty straightforward to do and just as easy to actually do it. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the next stage and actually all that good stuff of getting a goods movement reference. So I'm going to hand back to Lorna, who is going to run through that for you.
Thank you, Paul. So as Paul says, I'm going to talk through now how you create that goods movement reference. So the screen you should be seeing now is what we call the Gvms Dashboard. So this is the screen where you will be able to see all of the GMRs that you've created previously. You can see here that there is a link to the check if you need to report for an inspection service, and Paul will run through that a little bit further on. You can also see on any GMRs that you've created previously, you can see what their status is. So these ones show as draft in this example, but there's also a link towards the bottom of this screen where you can view any GMRs that have already completed their crossing. So for the purpose of this demonstration, we would click the green button near the top there that says create a new GMR. And then what you'll see next is the first part of the GMR creation. We want you to tell us where the crossing is going from and to. So for this example, we said that it was going from an EU port into Great Britain. And then once you've selected that and clicked continue, you'll be presented with this screen to check the direction. Now, it's really important that you check you've entered the correct direction for this crossing, because once you've saved this page, you can't go back and change this particular item. So it confirms the direction that you've chosen and asks you to make sure you complete all the mandatory fields, but then does advise you that you cannot change the direction once you have created the draft GMR. So if you're happy that you've got the correct direction, you would click Save and Continue. And then that will take you to this page, which confirms that your draft GMR has been created. Now, there's a few different pieces of information on this page. Very and most importantly is your GMR number. So the goods movement reference number is there in bold. You need to make sure that the driver, whoever's in control of the movement of these goods, has that GMR number before they arrive at the port to check in. So you're advised there that you can add information to the GMR at any time. It will always be in draft format for you to revisit and add extra information as you get it. You can create your GMR up to 28 days in advance of the actual crossing. So you can start the draft GMR well in advance of the movement and add declaration references as and when you get them from your supply chain. And then you want to check the status of your completed GMR. Once you've done that, there's a little bit of extra information about moving goods under the Common Transit Convention and a little bit of extra information about using an export accompanying document from the EU. Both of those links there just expand the additional text on the page. They won't take you away from this page. So when you're happy that you've read and understood everything that's on this page, you would click continue. There's also a link for you to go back to the dashboard as well. Sorry, I should have said that. If you want to go back to the dashboard at any point, there is a link at the bottom of the page. And also a link to report any technical issues with the page. Thank you. So you've got all of your details there. What we want now is for you to put the actual information in about 3 different sections. So about the journey, the actual crossing itself, then about the vehicle and whether it's accompanied or unaccompanied, and then about the declarations that you've got. So there is a note that reminds you that you have to complete all of the sections before you go to the port. And those additional links again are at the bottom of the page, so you can go back to the dashboard. But there's also a new link on this page where you can delete the goods movement reference in its entirety. So if you create a draft in advance of the journey, but you, for whatever reason, are no longer going to make that journey, or if you clicked save and continue on the direction of the crossing, but actually you need to change it or you put it wrong, you can delete the GMR and start all over again. So we'll go through these in order. So we'll start with section 1, which is about your crossing. So a couple of simple questions here. What is the planned route of the crossing? So they are drop-down menus on the place of departure and the place of arrival. Once you've chosen your destination and departure, you click continue, and then you're asked to select which carrier it is that you're using. If it's not one of the 3 that are specifically listed, you would just click unknown, and then you click continue. And then once you've clicked continue, that takes you back to the menu page, if you like, for want of a better description. And you can now see that we've completed section 1. It shows there that it's completed. Now you can fill in sections 2 and 3 in any order that you want, but there are subsections to those that you cannot start until you've put some of the basic information in. So we'll just continue to do them in order. So the next section that we'll complete is about the vehicle. And we want to know if it's accompanied or unaccompanied. So the question is, will the driver be travelling with the vehicle? And there's a little explanation there that basically says that it means that the driver will be driving the vehicle onto the ferry or train at the port of departure and driving it off again at the port of arrival to continue on with the journey. So we've said yes, the driver will be travelling with the vehicle. We've clicked continue, And then we've got the next step, which is asking us for the vehicle registration details. So this is not the trailer that's attached to the vehicle, even though the goods are actually in that trailer or container on the vehicle. The registration number that we want is the actual cab, the driving part of the vehicle that's got the license plate registration number on it. So you fill those details in and click continue. And then again, you go back to this menu page and it shows that we've fully completed section 2. And again, you can still go back to the dashboard, or you could still delete the GMR in total if for whatever reason you needed to do that. So we'll go and complete section 3 now, which is the declaration information. So this first part of section 3 is asking if the goods contain, if the vehicle contains goods. You do need to create a GMR for empty movements. So bear that in mind, and that's why we've got that option on there. For this example, though, we've said yes, it contains goods. Now, there's some information on this next bit, which tells you that you can add as many declaration types as you need to, but you have to do them each one at a time. So we've selected a transit movement for this example because currently CTC is the only process whereby you need to create the GMR until the 1st of January. So we've said that it's a transit declaration, and then you click continue. And then what you're asked for is to confirm the movement reference number from that transit declaration. So there's a little bit of information here to help you identify the MRN, the movement reference number. It tells you that it's 18 characters and it tells you what the format is. So once you've put that movement reference number in the box there, you are asked to confirm the type of document, because there is the possibility of creating a TAD, a transit accompanying document, or a TSAD, a transit security accompanying document. Both options are on there. However, we do need to point out that currently, for providing safety and security information to Great Britain, you cannot use a combined TSAD. So it always needs to be a TAD document, and then it would be accompanied by an entry summary declaration for the safety and security information once that requirement comes in from the 1st of July 22. So once you've told us which type of document it is, you then get a confirmation that confirms you've added one declaration so far. It gives you the reference number that you've entered, so you can double check it. And it tells you that the status is OK. So the HMRC systems has already started doing some verification in the background to make sure that you've entered the correct reference number. You can change or remove a declaration at any point. And you can also add more declarations on that link there towards the bottom. There's also a link towards the top underneath that title bar that says you can add another declaration. So a couple of links on there, and there's also some additional information on how to get help with errors, and we'll cover those a little bit later on. So for the purpose of this, we will select continue. And then this screen again tells us we've now completed all of the sections that are required for this to be a valid GMR. So there is a prompt again to make sure you've completed all of the sections. And then once you're happy with that, you select continue. And you're given the final chance to check that you've put the correct answers in. So it shows you a summary of all of the information that you've put into this GMR. So you've got your crossing details, the vehicle details, and then the information about the declarations. Now you can change any of those answers. There's a little blue link that says change. next to each section of information, so you could go back and change any of that information. For argument's sake, if you need to use a different vehicle, you would go back in and you could change the vehicle registration number. It's very important that you give us the correct vehicle registration number before you check in at the port, because the details will be checked and they'll be validated. So you need to make sure that you've got the correct registration number in there. So then finally, when you're happy with all of that information, you would click Finish at the bottom of the screen there. And then you'll be shown your finalized GMR. So in the big green box there at the top, you've got the goods movement reference number, and you've also got a barcode. So that barcode can be scanned at check-in. There's a little confirmation there of the planned route and the vehicle registration details. And you've also got the option to print the GMR or save it as a PDF. So however you need to give that GMR to your driver, you've got a couple of options there. And then there's lots of information about what happens next. So there's a section for the driver that tells them they need to present the GMR at the port. And there's also a link for the driver to check if they need to report for an inspection. Again, Paul will cover more about this a little bit further on, but that's very important for the driver to be able to access that service, or for you to have a process in place to make sure your driver knows whether they need to report for an inspection. And then again, further down that page, and it's split into two parts here for the purpose of getting it onto one slide, but further down the page, it then gives you a section for the haulier or whoever's creating the GMR that's just advising you need to give a copy of it to the driver who's moving the goods. And if the driver doesn't have access to the check, if you need to report for an inspection service, you need to make sure you give them the details of any inspection that's required. And you can also make sure you check for any errors with the GMR and correct them before the driver gets to the port. So that's it. You've now got your GMR. The driver can proceed to the port and go on their crossing. So that's all you need to do in terms of actually creating your GMR. What we'll do now is just to cover off some questions. We know that there are a lot of questions that have been coming in to the chat, and a number of my colleagues, I believe, have been putting some answers to those questions. So what I'll do, I am actually struggling to see those questions at the moment. If my colleague Paul can see the questions in the chat, Paul, are you able to pick out a couple of questions that we can maybe answer in this section?
Yeah, let me have a look, Lorna.
Or if not, perhaps we could ask Natasha, perhaps if you could maybe pick out a couple of questions for us.
Yeah, I think just to get started on this, sort of while Paul is looking through and looking for more specific questions, there were quite a few questions on how GVMS works with unaccompanied movements. So I don't know whether there's someone on the line who would just be able to chat that through briefly.
Thanks, Natasha. So have we got a specific about how it works with the unaccompanied movements, or is it just in general about who needs to present the GMR and who's in charge of things? Do we have a specific question?
Yeah, so there's quite a few that are general in terms of who needs to present the GMR, what number do I use in the system, so maybe if you could speak through it sort of in general terms, and then I will pick out some of the more specific questions.
Yes, certainly. Paul, are you able to pick that up, or George, would it be yourself that would be able to pick that up about unaccompanied movements?
So I was just looking through the questions, Lorna, so I didn't pick up all of the question. Then I'm afraid I thought George was going to come in at some point. But
yeah, George, can you pick that question up, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So yeah, I think there have been a few questions that have been raised about how GVMS works for unaccompanied movements, both under the pre-lodgement model and potentially also under the temporary storage model. So I can talk to that sort of briefly, because I'm conscious there have been some relatively recent changes to the border operating model to reflect that. So GVMS is obviously available to support movements that are using the legal pre-lodgement model, and to support export movements at ports that are using GVMS. More recently, the government has announced that GVMS can also be used to facilitate movements at temporary storage locations in these instances, and this is for both accompanied and unaccompanied movements. In those instances, GVMS will need to be integrated by the port carrier community system provider with the inventory system that's in place at that border location. This is an optional facilitation that is available for industry should the port carrier and CSP agree to that. In those instances, which has been applicable for accompanied and unaccompanied movements, GVMS would integrate with the inventory system and would return back a held or cleared message to the inventory, so that those goods would be either released from the inventory control or held at the border location on arrival if they required an inspection. In terms of how GVMS itself works for unaccompanied, I think that has been sort of walked through to an extent in terms of the references that are needed. GVMS will ask whether the goods are moving accompanied or unaccompanied, and the reference numbers will differ based on the sort of response to that question. So for unaccompanied goods, and Paul might be able to add if there's anything more on this, but for unaccompanied goods, that will need to be the trailer reference or the container reference number. In terms of who presents then that GMR, I think that will differ to an extent based on the practices that are in place at that location. In some instances, it will still be the haulier who creates and presents that GMR. In other instances, I understand it may be the carrier who raises and sends those GMRs across to HMRC. But I'll pause in case any colleagues want to come in on the GVMS sort of logistics behind that. But hopefully that's at least some helpful background to unaccompanied, and also to the use of GVMS at temporary storage locations.
Yeah, George, in terms of the you mentioned the container reference number and trailer reference number, and that's that's correct. If it's non-accompanied movement, instead of the vehicle registration, it will be that trailer or registration, and that will be presented in the GMR by whoever actually takes those goods to the port. Then the operator within the port would actually do the moving of the goods onto the vessel. I will actually handle it on the other side as well, on the GB side if it's an EU GB movement, and that's basically how the unaccompanied would work.
Brilliant, thanks Paul. Thanks George as well for that explanation. So I can now see the questions that are in the Q&A. So I just wanted to pick up on one question that we've had. The question is, looking at the EU to GB side in GVMS, it prompts you for a safety and security declaration However, the latest board or operating model states that safety and security declarations aren't required until the 1st of July 22. So that is correct. So the reason that GVMS has the functionality to submit the safety and security declaration currently is that potentially a transit movement that comes from outside of the EU may need to have a safety and security declaration. But also we are encouraging our stakeholders, industry, as much as possible. If you are in a position that you can complete your entry summary declarations now, then the functionality is available for you to be able to put that information into the GMR. There is wording, and apologies, I don't know the exact wording on the GMR, but when you are prompted for that entry summary declaration, I do believe that it does tell you that it's not mandatory at the moment until July 22, but it is optional for you to be able to add that reference number for the ENS. So if you're ready to submit them, by all means, submit them and put the reference number into the GMR, but you can skip past that page on the GMR without it affecting the GMR in any way, shape or form until the 1st of July 22. So if we just have a look and see what other questions we've got. So we've got a question here. Is it possible to give access for GVMS 2.0 before the 1st of January 2022? So Paul, do you want to quickly give an answer on that one about accessing GVMS?
Yes, so in terms of accessing GVMS, yeah, we will be releasing communication shortly about when you can actually access that. In terms of import movements, you will be able to create your GMRs a little bit earlier than the 1st of January, but for the exports, you won't actually be able to create those actually until the 1st of January, but we will be releasing communications around that really shortly.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think we seem to have quite a few questions. We'll cover this little bit next, and then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. There will be time for further questions for us to go through later on. But I think there are a lot of questions in the chat about when GVMS will be available and when it can be tested. Paul, are you able to just touch on some of the live proving work that we've been doing within HMRC and ability for people to be part of that live proving or not in the run up to the 1st of January?
Yeah, that can, Lorna, that's not a problem. So yeah, so over in HMRC, we have been testing the GVMS system for both imports and exports. When we refer to testing, we've been calling that live proving because we're proving the system works. So that's our term for actually testing this. We have reached out through trade associations within the UK and into Europe as well to obtain haulier volunteers and supply chain volunteers to actually help us with that testing. Testing is still underway. If you are interested, please supply your details in the chat function today, and I will forward that to the EU live proving team who will get in touch with you to see how you can actually help with that. So yeah, if you could drop me a line with an email address, a contact number as well, if you've got that, put that into the chat function today. I'll ensure that your details are actually passed on to our live proving team. That's if you want to participate.
Lovely, thank you, Paul. So as I say, there are further opportunities later on in the presentation to ask and for us to answer more questions. But what we'll do in the interest of making sure we do get through all of the information, we'll move on to the next section of the presentation, which is how to check if you need to report for an inspection. So Paul, over to you to cover off this section, please.
Okay, thanks, Lorna. Okay, so how to check if you need to report for an inspection. So this is a service which is directed mostly at the driver. Now, a driver usually wouldn't have access to GVMS themselves. They wouldn't normally be checking the GVMS status themselves because they won't have completed the GMR generally. Generally speaking, it is the haulier back office, or sometimes an agent or another third party, but rarely actually the driver themselves, unless they are one of those sole traders who completes it themselves. So the check if you need to report for an inspection service is a service that has been introduced so you can check the inspection service of the goods when you are traveling. So this is the opening page. You don't need any sort of access to registration to the government gateway or to GVMS itself. So everything that Lorna and I have walked through today so far in terms of that registration, a driver does not need to have all of that information to access this service. Okay. If you do access this service, there's two ways you can actually access it. You can access it via a freestanding link to the service, or you can actually link it from the GMR that that Lorna showed you an example of before. So you may remember that when that barcode was generated, there was a link within that barcode that stated check if you need to report for an inspection, and you can click on that. So if you have access to the likes of a device, possibly a smartphone, it's good to have that so you can actually check that and you can click straight on the link. So what does that page look like when you land on it? Well, first of all, it gives you the option to check in various languages. So you can see we've got a lot of common languages there. English and Welsh ranging through to Spanish, but the main European languages are all available. So you can click in which language you'd like to view the service in. And we're showing you it in English today, but it's exactly the same. It's just translated into the various languages and you're getting the same thing, so to speak. So what can you use the service for? So you can use it for both imports and exports from Great Britain. So you can use it if you're entering the UK. And you can see this advises that you check towards the end of your crossing around 10 minutes before you reach your port of arrival. Leaving the UK, you can also check before leaving your port of departure. Some things that you need before you start. So firstly, you need to enter your goods movement reference. So that is the reference generated by the GVMS when you actually create a GMR, and you'll recall the green screen with the barcode. There is also an alphanumeric reference there. Once you've entered it, you'll get one of these responses, and it will tell you that you'll either get a response stating there's an inspection is needed, or an inspection is not needed, or your inspection status is not ready yet. On to say you'll be told what inspections are needed and that you will need to report to the appropriate inspection location. That could be at your port of arrival, or it could be at an inland border facility, depending on the port that you're arriving in. So we assume we're going to progress with this. So if we hit the Start Now button, that will take us to the next screen. The next step you'll get, and the next screen you'll get, is what is your goods movement reference. So this tells you that you would find this on the copy of the GMR you used to check in the crossing. So that GMR, the green example we gave you before, the green screen with the barcode, and a number in a format similar to this. And when you enter that and continue, we'll then find out whether that GMR is valid or not. If you've entered the wrong GMR, it's not in the right format or whatever, something incorrect, it will tell you straight away. and it will confirm again what that format actually is and to enter it again. For the purposes of this, we got it wrong the first time, but we've re-entered the GMR again and we have continued, and hopefully we got it right. Okay, so you could get a message advising that the status is not available yet, and that's because HMRC systems need to risk the declarations and send the result back to GVMS. So if you get this message, it will tell you to check again approximately 10 minutes before you get to the arrival border location. You can actually use this screen to check the status again. So you can click this button and check this status again, and that will trigger that attempt to check the status. Alternatively, you could check another GMR if you needed to. Okay, so some messages that may be returned. So if there's no inspection needed, you're told at this point that you do not need to report for an inspection of goods, but may still need to report for some other controls. So there are some other goods that may need controls at their port of entry. So that could be a transit movement arriving in the country of destination, which would need to report to an office of destination. Or it could be movement of animals, plants or organics. Or it could be goods covered by the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which we know as CITES. You should always check with your declarant around this. So if you were a driver, you would have a contact number for your haulier, and you must have a good line of contact with your haulier back office to ensure that if any other checks do come up, that you do actually report for them as required. If you don't have any controls to report for, you can continue from your port of arrival to your destination, and you will be told about this front. If there is an inspection required, you were told that an inspection is required. It's quite straightforward. And what happens next? Well, the report is to go to UK Border Force for an inspection of your goods at the nearest customs inspection site. So that would be either at your port of arrival or at an inland border location, or what we call an IBF, an inland border facility. You can click on this link here that will actually take you to our inland border facility page. That includes details of where you can go and how to book there in advance. Similarly to the previous page, there may be other checks that are required beyond the customs inspections. For example, ending that transit movement again at an office of destination. That would usually be at the same inspection site. Or there may be additional controls required. Again, it's a matter of checking with the declarant, and again that highlights the importance of the driver having a line of sight with their haulier back office, or whichever third party or broker or agent is actually completing the GMR, because if there's some more information required, there needs to be a clear link between declarant, haulier and driver to ensure that these checks are followed up on. So that is the haulier check if you need to report for an inspection service. Again, just to recap, you don't actually have to have access to a government gateway account or to GVMS itself. This is something the driver can access, and it is best accessed around 10 minutes before you were due in the port of arrival. Also, just that final note about the fact that even though you may not have an inspection, or you have an inspection for customs checks, you may have other inspections too. So please do ensure that you have that line of sight between haulier, driver and declarant in case there are further checks that need to be taken. I'm just now going to run through how to avoid and correct common errors in GVMS. So in terms of GVMS, you recall that Lorna referred to the dashboard a little bit earlier. So if you're using the front end or web user interface for GVMS, you will have a dashboard that looks something like this for every, and this will note the GMRs that you have created for your business. In many ways, the actual dashboard is quite self-explanatory. There is a sort function to confirm to sort by departure date, and you'll see the various movement references that are available for GMRs that you've created. When you are creating GMRs, if there's any GMR that isn't finalizable, you will see a message there that says that it contains errors. So this will stand out. It's in red text. You can find out if there are any errors there at all. And if you click into the GMR, you have the opportunity to go back and correct any errors there. Now, an important point to make here at this stage is when you're creating GMRs, or when a haulier or an agent or a third party is creating those GMRs, if you don't correct any errors that are actually seen here, and the GMR is actually taken to the port, the driver will be turned away from check-in and would need to move to a designated parking area or away from the port to resolve any issues with the haulier or intermediary who created that GMR. So it is important that this is all done up front to avoid any problems for the driver when they do arrive at that port of exit. So how do you avoid common errors? Just going to talk through a few of those today to make life just a little bit easier for you when you're actually completing the GMR. Okay, so one common error, incorrect transit accompanying movement MRN for transit movements. Only the TAD movement reference number from NCTS should be entered in the declaration reference box if you're moving under transit. If you enter an invalid number, you will receive an error message because GVMS will communicate with NCTS to confirm that that TAD movement reference number is correct. Also, an important point is that the TAD movement reference number needs to be a movement reference number for a movement that has been through the processes for offices of departure and has been released. Otherwise, you will get an error message if you have not been through that full process. So you may have that TAD movement reference number early, but it has not been through the full office of departure processes. Until the office of departure processes have been fully completed, you should not enter that into a TAD. Not enter that into a GMR. The reference numbers that you may get wrong. So if you put in an incorrect entry reference number from Chief or a movement reference number from CDS, you will receive an error message immediately. Reason for that is it either does not meet the correct format, or there is actually a problem with the movement itself. So that's something that you do need to actually check. And if you're receiving any error messages, you will find out straight away as soon as you actually enter that movement reference number or entry reference number. Another point where you may go wrong is if you enter the EORI of a trader who isn't authorised to use simplified customs declaration procedures. So if the EORI is for a trader who is not authorised, you will immediately receive an error message. So from the 1st of January, you can only enter what we call an entry in declarant's records, an EORI for a GB trader who is authorised to use simplified customs declaration procedures. If the EORI is not authorised, you will receive an error message. Lastly, is probably the most common error that can be made. So you must ensure that the vehicle registration number and trailer reference numbers are entered correctly into a GMR. If the vehicle details in the GMR are different to the vehicle that arrives at the border location, you won't be able to actually board until that GMR is corrected. Now, this is a really common one. drivers, hauliers will be more than aware the things that can go wrong before you arrive at the port. You often have to change vehicles last minute sometimes. And if this is the case, you do need to update that GMR so it actually reflects the vehicle that is being checked in with the carrier, because that's something that the carrier does validate every time. Okay, so I've run through the driver messaging service and some of the errors, common errors that you can make when completing the GMR. I'm just going to hand back over to Lorna for that help and support that is available for any problems that you do have. So Lorna, back to you.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, we just wanted to make sure that you are aware of the different methods of help that we have available if you're struggling to create the GMR or get the goods actually moved across the border, or if you're having problems with your sign-in details on gov.uk. So the first one that we have here is probably the most common, and that's our Customs and International Trade Helpline. So the telephone number is there, and these slides will be shared with you after the event. The telephone number can also be found on gov.uk, but that helpline is open from 8 AM till 10 PM Monday to Friday, and also from 8 AM till 4 PM on weekends. They will provide advice about GVMS. They'll be able to help with any problems registering for GVMS or any error messages that you get that you can't resolve when you're creating your GMRs. But they are also, there is 24/7, so help 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for any urgent issues that are preventing you from progressing your goods through the border. So when you call that Customs and International Trade Helpline, you can select option 1 for those urgent issues if it's outside of those operating hours that I've just mentioned there. We also have an online services help desk that are available from 8 AM till 4 PM Monday to Friday. They specifically help you with the technical aspects in terms of your government gateway credentials. So if you're having trouble with your actual user ID and password, whether you've lost them or you need to reset them, they will help you with those kinds of queries. We also then have what we call Desk Pro. Now, you will have noticed when we've gone through the slides, there is a link at the bottom of every screen that says get help with this page. So if the actual page is not working, or if there is some information on there that is it's not, if it's a pop-up box and it's not popping up for you, then you can use that link at the bottom of each page and it will create an incident ticket that will go to our Desk Pro service. Those links are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but then the queries that come through to HMRC will be dealt with between 8 AM and 6 PM Monday to Friday. Now, because we're specifically talking about GVMS here, we just want to point out that we do have a dedicated page on gov.uk which tells you all about the service availability of GVMS. If there are any issues with the service and it's unavailable for any period of time, a message will be on there. And we also notify any future planned outages of the GVMS service. So if we are planning to do any updates or maintenance on it, then those future dates will be made available on gov.uk so that you can plan around them. So just wanted to go through there to make sure that you are aware of the various different avenues of help and support that we've got. So that's it for the presentation. We want to try and get through as many questions as we can for you. So we will try and pick out some questions that are in the chat. We have a number of government colleagues on this presentation with us, and they've been answering as many questions as we can in the chat. So please do check back in that chat. If you've asked a question, please do go back and have a look to see if we've answered it for you. As I say, we will pick out some questions now to go through and continue answering for you. But any questions that we don't get through, and likewise all of the questions that have been asked that have an answer, we will provide them in an electronic format. So we will take all of the questions away and we'll make sure that they've got an answer, and then we will provide those to you. We'll also be providing this slide pack out to everyone that's registered for this event. We do, before we get into any questions, we do have one final Slido question that we would like you to answer for us, if you don't mind. So question 3 is, following the webinar, I understand what I need to do to move goods between the EU and GB. And that's a very simple yes or no answer. We would very much appreciate if you could go on to Slido and answer those questions that we've posed of you today. But what we'll do, we'll now start to pick out a few of the questions that perhaps we haven't had a chance to get round to answering yet. So I'll pick out a few, and then Paul, if I hand over to you, maybe if you wouldn't mind picking out a few that
No problem.
that you think are really relevant. I mean, all of the questions are relevant, but some of them have a number of questions along the same theme. So we will try and answer as many of those as possible. So a lot of you have actually asked if the slides are going to be made available. So as I've just said, yes, we'll be sending the slides out to everyone that's registered after the event. And we will be sending out those the answers to the questions as well. They will come as a separate document. We do aim to get those out within 1 to 2 weeks. As you can appreciate, we have a large number of questions, so sometimes it can take a little bit longer, but we do try and get those out as quickly as possible. So let me just pick out a question. So some of the early questions, hopefully we've answered throughout the presentation, but there is a question that says, where do you get the GMR number? So Paul, if you can very quickly skip back to slide 30, please. So as I walk through on creating the GMR, once you've completed that and you've done you've updated all of the information, then the GMR, the goods movement reference number, is provided to you there as a final confirmation along with the barcode. You can see the goods movement reference number on nearly every screen that you go through once you've created that draft. As soon as you select create a goods movement reference and then you confirm the movement that you're the direction that you're crossing, then you will be given a draft goods movement reference number, and that reference number stays the same right the way through that process. So you're given it on slide 20, Paul. You're given the draft GMR as soon as you've hit the button that says create a goods movement reference, and as I say, that's carried on right the way through the slides, and then it's on the final page with the barcode as well. So hopefully that's answered that question. Let me find another one. Right, this is a good one. Is the registration in various languages? So not entirely sure if you're referring to the government gateway registration or the actual GVMS registration. Paul, are you able to answer the question about the languages for the actual GVMS registration?
Yes, Lorna, yes. So we are looking, HMRC are looking to translate as many pages as we possibly can and relevant pages as we possibly can. The actual registration process at the moment is not in any other languages apart from English and Welsh, but we are looking to change that as soon as we possibly can. However, many of our services are going to be available in different languages from the 1st of January, and certainly that creation of a GMR that Lorna walked you through, that's going to be available, as is the driver messaging service, which I did demonstrate a little bit earlier. You know, that is available in 10 European languages already. Yeah, it's a little bit of a work in progress, but we are gradually starting to translate our services into as many multiple languages as possible.
Lovely, thanks, Paul. So we have another question here that says, what if you do not have a fixed establishment in the UK, but a GB EORI? I think that means, but you need a GB EORI. So you can get a GB prefixed EORI number without being established in the UK. If you go to gov.uk/EORI, EORI, then you can follow that process to get a GB EORI number, and it is possible to get one without having that UK establishment. So we are aware that obviously a lot of non-UK hauliers, drivers, industry partners will not have an establishment in the UK, but you can get that GB EORI without having that. We have another question here. Where do we have to put the import entry in GVMS? So not entirely sure what you mean by the import entry. I'm assuming that you mean the declaration references. So just to talk through the process, and Paul, do jump in here if I say anything incorrect. But just to go through the process, if you are making an import into GB, you will select the crossing details. You will select the type of movement, whether it's accompanied or unaccompanied, and then you will be asked what kind of movement it is. So on the screen that I showed you when you're creating the GMR, you can select whether it's an entry in declarant record, whether it's a transit movement, whether it's an ATA carnet. So there is an option on there for it being a standard movement, so that would be an import or an export, and then you would be asked for the declaration references. So it may be that you're using a European export document, an EAD. I believe you would put that reference number in. Am I right there, Paul?
You wouldn't use an EAD, Lorna. I think that's one that we sometimes get we get incorrect. You would that it's used for an indirect export from Republic of Ireland to the UK. But I mean, I can sort of talk through some of the common questions that were asked about which reference you enter. If that's
that's if
useful.
You don't mind, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
That's I mean that's one we do often we do often get wrong. Sometimes the EAD, the export company and document reference is entered into fields, and hauliers don't get any further because of that. For example, they've entered it into a transit field. So in terms of imports from EU into GB. So if it's an import into customs handling of import and export freight, which we know is chief, that's an entry reference number that you would enter, which is made up of 3 numbers. And you know, if you're familiar with chief, you'll know these really well, but it's made up of three numbers called an EPU, an entry processing unit, an ENO, which is an entry number, and actually the date. So you've got an 18-digit reference there. And what GVMS will actually do when it goes live on the 1st of January, it will actually break that number down into those 3 constituent parts to help you get that right when you enter it into the service. If your import is into CDS, which is going to supersede chief in the long run, you would enter an 18-digit movement reference number, which is in an alphanumeric format, which is produced by chief. Other reference numbers that you would enter would be the transit reference number from what we call the TAD, the Transit Accompanying Documents MRN, from for Common Transit Convention movements. You already have to do that for EU GB movements, or you may need to enter those carnet reference numbers for an ATA or a TIR, and those numbers are clearly shown on the front of those accompanying carnet documents that you would actually have. Also, alternatively, as we talked through a little earlier, you could enter the GBEORI for a trader who is simplified customs declaration procedure authorized. Those are the references you would enter on a import. On an export from GB into the EU, so it's in most cases, if you export from chief or CDS, it's always going to be what we call a declaration unique consignment reference, or we call that very nicely the DUCA. And that is the combined export and safety and security exit summary declaration in one. So that's what you would tend to enter. You could enter a TIR or ATA carnet as well, which is going in the other direction. Sometimes, and I think this covers off another question in there, you may need to enter the TAD movement reference number for a transit movement. Now, that is in very, very specific circumstances. I may need to call on my colleagues who are from transit policy to sort of confirm or you know, put me right on any of this information. But if you're actually moving through what we call an arrived export port, so that, you know, that certainly covers the likes of Dover, Eurotunnel, Holyhead, plus a few other ports as well that we referred to last week. Or if the trader is approved for custom supervised exports, it's enough to add the TAD MRN into the GMR for any export movement which is followed by transit, and there's no need to input those export DUCAs separately within GBMS. However, if you're moving through a standard export location where the declarations have to be submitted as pre-lodged, or if the traders are not approved for CSE in those locations, then the DUCAs will need to be included separately within GVMS, and the TAD movement reference numbers would not be used in those circumstances. For other rest of world movements, so movements that are coming from the rest of the world but actually start on a transit procedure in GB, the movement reference number needs to be included in GVMS, as there won't be a GB export declaration for those movements. I think at this point I've just talked through a few things there, and just if any of my colleagues from the transit in the transit space have any further comments around when you would use a transit, I'd maybe sort of welcome them to come in at this stage.
You explained that perfectly, Paul. So thank you very much.
Thanks. So yeah, so I think I've sort of covered through most of those references that you would need to enter for either in both directions, either from GB to EU or from EU to GB. Export accompanying document is not one we would need in this particular instance. That is used in really niche situations. Most commonly, if you're actually moving from Republic of Ireland into Great Britain, but using a Northern Irish port. Brilliant.
Please don't mention that, Paul. I'll say that I did that on purpose.
I think you did, Lorna. I think you did. You led me in with that one.
Yeah. So that was you've actually answered the next question that I was going to pick out. So it's a question that we had from Mark, which was specifically about that export from GB to EU. And you've clarified that on the webinar that you held last week, we confirmed that for arrived ports, you can choose between putting the ducker or the TAD MRN, and you would normally put the ducker in. So you've clarified that. Thank you, Paul. So we have another question here that asks, do I have to wait for my account to be activated when I finish the registration? So yes, there will be a level of activation that takes place. So assuming that you're referring to the government gateway account, first of all, we'll cover both the government gateway and the GVMS registration. So when you register for your government gateway account, there will be a level of activation that you will need to wait for before you can then go on to register for the goods vehicle movement service. Now, providing all of the information that you give us is accurate and correct, then these processes shouldn't take very long at all to go through. Paul or any other colleagues, do we have the timings for the government gateway registration and then the GVMS registration, please, that we can just cover off?
Yeah, we're usually looking a couple of hours, Lorna. When you go through that GVMS registration, it usually tells you within a couple of hours, and it's usually active within a couple of hours. But if we have needed to do further checks or some of the information doesn't match what we have on our records, it can take a few days sometimes. But that is the exception rather than the rule. Usually you're up and running within a couple of hours.
Lovely, thank you. So conscious that we've only got 5 or 6 minutes left, we do want to make sure that we answer as many questions as possible. Paul, did you have any specific questions that you had spotted in the chat that you wanted to cover off while we've got our last few minutes?
I think there was just a question there, it seemed to go to about multi-factor authentication yet, and can we get multiple MFAs for multiple users? I think there's a good point to make about multi-factor authentication there, and an error that we've found sometimes when setting multi-factor authentication up is when an organisation has registered with just the one user and they've shared the password in the office, perhaps. And what happens is that every time somebody logs in, you could have 10 workers creating GMRs, and every time they log in, they get a request for a code. And then the office manager somewhere, his mobile phone is going off all day because it keeps pinging, requesting him for codes. So the way to go around that is to add additional users to your team. So if you're an organisation, you do actually have the option to actually add additional users, and they will get their own multi-factor authentication each time they actually log in, and will also get the opportunity to stay logged in for 7 days if they need to. So that's the way to avoid that pain and headache for the designated name who signed up for GVMS, because they can find themselves with hundreds of texts if it's been a password shared amongst colleagues. So not something you really want to do, and best avoided. So the best way to do that, set your team members up in your account.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. And just to add to that, does using for larger organizations, would using the Holier API to connect by kind of building that into the company or the organization software, would that help with that with those larger businesses that have got multiple users?
It can sometimes present a challenge if your software developer hasn't taken account of that. So it can work. Multi-factor authentication can work really well for third-party software that is being used to integrate within GVMS, and that is HMRC's preference. That because not everybody wants to be entering. You don't want to be entering hundreds and movement reference numbers into the front end of the government gateway. You want to try and automate that as much as you can. But it does need to be taken into account as a requirement when that third-party software provider is actually building your off-the-peg software, so to speak. But it can work really well. It just needs to be built into that software.
Lovely. Thanks, Paul. So thank you, everybody that submitted questions. We have had a large number of questions submitted. We do only have a few minutes left, so I think to save us running over, we will stop the questions there. We have put a number of answers into the questions within the chat. So as I said earlier, please do have a look to see if we've answered your question already. If not, we will be compiling all of the questions and the relevant answers, and we will be sending that out to anyone who's registered for the event. So we will be able to share that. We will be sharing the slides from this presentation, so you can go back and look through them in your own time to make sure that you know what you need to do for creating your GMRs. And just to say thank you to everybody who's taken the time to dial in and listen to this presentation. I'd like to thank my colleagues in BPDG who have advertised and arranged this event today. I think it's been very useful. Hopefully, from my perspective, I think it's been very useful to be able to provide you with that detailed information about how you can create your GMRs and how you can actually get registered onto the system. And thank you to Paul, my co-presenter, and all of our colleagues who have been beavering away to try and answer your questions in the chat. It's good to see that you are asking the kinds of questions that we would expect about the lower level detail. So hopefully we've been able to answer as many of your questions as possible, but do look out for those coming out to you very shortly. I'll just go out for any final thoughts or comments from any of my HM government colleagues on the line. No, we all must be happy. So thank you everybody for dialing in, and as Natasha mentioned earlier on in the event, this will be published on gov.uk, so you will be able to revisit this presentation at any time or share it with any colleagues that you may have that haven't been able to dial into this event. But thank you everybody for your attendance today.